That's my screen share. No, but actually. Recording. There we go. Do you want to say a few introductory words?
Joe?
Yes?
You said
do you want to say a few words before we start?
Oh, okay. So, hello everyone. My name is Frank. I'm the executive manager for AfricaOSH, and we're glad that you decided to join us for this webinar with AfricArXiv. And also, thank you, Joe, for really doing this. Yeah. So, Joe, if you could please. I think Joe might be having some internet issues also, so we wait for a sec. Apologies, everyone. Joe is trying to get back online and join us. There he is. Welcome back, Joe. Joe, if you can hear me, you're muted.
Yes. Okay, now we're going. Now we're moving. Can you hear me now? That's a bigger question. Can you?
Yes, we can hear you.
And can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Can you see the presentation? Oh, okay, great, excellent. Because I can't. Great, yeah, welcome. As I said before, now also on record, my name is Johanna Havemann, and I'm super excited to be able to present again at the AfricaOSH webinar series in my position as coordinator for AfricArXiv. A little bit about myself. I'm a trainer and consultant for OpenScience communication, and as such have a global focus for a global research audience, and in particular with AfricArXiv, also a regional focus on the African continent. And I'm very happy that I have the opportunity to work with many like-minded individuals and experts and professionals in scholarly communication, many of which I've had the pleasure of getting to know through the AfricaOSH network. I had to work towards for OpenScience and OpenAccess, and what our mission with AfricArXiv is, what I will also explain further today, is to promote African research for and with the global audience to improve opportunities for contribution of knowledge to the global scholarly knowledge hub, so to say, to improve discoverability of African research output, to make that better discoverable for any researcher around the world who wants to learn from African researchers and about African scholarship, and generally, yeah, for globally interoperable and integrative knowledge exchange. So today's topic is about open access publishing, and I'm personally specializing also through close collaboration with many of my friends and colleagues, again, some of which I've met through AfricaOSH. We focus on innovative workflows, which are top state-of-the-art, comply with requirements by publishers, research funders, and also aim towards making the research workflow for any researcher and also stakeholder of research results and society, which again also AfricaOSH facilitates the exchange of knowledge to improve the before mentioned. So we talk about innovative workflows and platforms for research dissemination and discovery, with today a focus on the African landscape and ecosystem. So what I'd like you to think about first is, or basically what we're trying to achieve is to make our research output discoverable and accessible so that...
Jo?
Yes?
Very sorry, your screen isn't showing, it doesn't look like.
Oh, thanks.
I can't see the presentation.
Thanks for mentioning that. Okay, let me reshare them. Let's quickly share in the same browser then. Thanks for the alert. Okay. So I can share window.
The joys of technology.
And I thought I was a digital native by now, but apparently. Window. Where's the other window? Okay, maybe I have to try again. Here we go. Hopefully. No.
Oh, there we go. Can see it now.
Okay. Now I can only see my presentation, but maybe that's good enough for me. Please shout because I can't see you guys anymore. But okay, so basically that was the cover slide from before. So just quickly, let's talk about today about open access publishing with innovative workflows and platforms for research dissemination and discovery in Africa. My name is Johanna Havemann. I am independent consultant and trainer for open science communication. I also manage the African open access portal AfricArXiv, which we come to talk about briefly later during this presentation. And I'm very glad to be able to speak to you today as a member of the AfricaOSH community. And AfricArXiv was also born and launched through AfricaOSH at the first summit in Kisumu, Ghana in 2018. So we want to make our research output discoverable and accessible so that our research results can unfold societal impact and benefits. Here is a quick overview, which can also be further extended, or we see more organizations which are African run, African managed, by African scholarly stakeholders, and grassroots initiative, of course, the Africa Open Science hardware community. There's organizations like Trend in Africa who focus on hardware capacity building or open source hardware for research across the African continent. Science Nigeria, African Science Literacy Network, just to name a few. And Boa Lab is also a prominent representative. And the African Open Science platform is just now resuming operations after they had a year or almost 2 years of pausing, and they are basically, so we have a mix here of bottom-up and top-down organizations, the governmental run or funded and policy maker-driven organizations to incentivize towards and for open science practices, and then grassroots organizations who basically run a bottom-up approach to guide researchers in adopting and embracing open science practices. So yeah, talking about open access and open access publishing, let's first get clear on a few definitions what that means, open access, because there's been a little bit of confusion lately anywhere we go on the globe, because open access has apparently become a synonym for, oh, it's expensive to publish open access, but that's not what open access should or wants to stand for, if it can have an opinion. It just means that access to the information is accessible without any paywall barrier or technical barrier. And the only technical barrier that might exist is people not having access to the internet through their phones, through their computers, anywhere. So that's a prerequisite, but otherwise open access means you can access the information, and in our case, scholarly output, like research articles. And then, of course, to provide that service, to make the information available, there is work that goes in. Also, we as AfricArXiv have a lot of work with providing the infrastructure and the team and the services and the Q&A opportunities, the guidance, the capacity building. There's a lot of work that goes in, and the question is who pays for such services. But open access means the end user, the reader of information, which can be a researcher or another society stakeholder, should not have to pay. This is basically what open access stands for. And now there are different kinds of open access sourced from Wikipedia, and you will also find other venues for similar definitions. There's now a so-called color scheme for open access, where green stands for self-archiving by the author, free of charge, which is usually through preprint repositories. And and if you're not familiar with the term preprint, we'll come to that in just a few minutes. But you can also just put your article on your own website or on the university website or in the library repository. That's all green because it's managed by the author or service personnel at the institution where the authors are located, and then access is provided without charges usually. So that's green for you. Then there is gold open access, which is understood nowadays. There's also various definitions or interpretations of such, like when it goes more into the detail. But most what I've found online and how I understand gold open access is that the journal publisher now applies an article processing charge, so that the submitting author has to pay extra for the publisher to make the works openly accessible on their systems, on their databases that they maintain, like the online journal. And that fee, that APC fee, can be of whichever amount the publisher deems necessary to charge. And it ranges anything between, I don't know, $100 to several $1,000s per article. And that's when it becomes like hardly affordable for anyone really, because you have to cut that money out of your research budget. And unless the funders take a certain amount into consideration for publishing, and again, the publishing fees, the range is huge across journals, also inside one publishing house, then you have to cut it from HR or from research equipment. So it can be a limiting factor for your research capacity in general. but it shouldn't be in our view. So we're also here to discuss what else can we do, and what are the alternatives, and what's a reasonable fee that we are, as researchers, as a research team, are still happy to pay. But also keep in mind that any service provider, of course, needs their costs covered. It's just a matter of what is reasonable as a price to pay. And us as clients to these publishing houses and journals, we can make decisions. And this is what this presentation is also for, to show you the alternatives that are available to keep the expenses in manageable ranges. Now, diamond or platinum open access is when a library or an institution covers the article processing charges for the authors and the readers. So neither the author, the submitting author, or the reader of the articles have to pay anything. But that means that the institution has to make sure the budget is available to sustain the services, to making the work accessible in the first place. And that's often through in-house budgeting, or by third-party investments and funds that the institution, like the university or the university library, receives for particularly this service. And then there is hybrid open access, which goes back to gold open access. And these are journals that have both paywall articles and open access articles. And it tends to still be the case, apparently, but not necessarily in all journals, that hybrid journals are more expensive to publish open access because it's not a default mechanism for them. So they basically have extra work steps to provide for open access, and that makes it more expensive in general, but not necessarily for every journal. You might also find journals where they say, oh, we only charge a manageable or whatever little amount, you still find little, to provide open access, and others add a whole big number to make it open access. And then there's black open access, or what's considered as unauthorized open access. And you might have come across or heard about Sci-Hub, probably even used. And yeah, that's a whole discussion on its own. You shouldn't use Sci-Hub, but unfortunately for many researchers around the world, it's the only way to gain access to certain research articles. And that again makes this a vital source of information and knowledge sharing. It's just that it's deemed illegal or unauthorized under the light of the publishing houses, because they of course see their business model under threat. But Sci-Hub is basically motivated by everybody should have access to knowledge, and we can have a lengthy debate about the moral motivation or the legal limitations, and should we use Sci-Hub or should we not. The fact is that many researchers have to go back to Sci-Hub, but also increasingly not anymore. So it's like, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say this on record, but I'm still going to say it. I'm glad for Sci-Hub to kind of push the barriers and to shed light on the necessity and questioning the status quo. And now the good message is that there are now authorized workflows that you can embrace, which provide for open access publishing workflows and consumption workflows of scholarly information, where you basically have a legal compliance with your national and also international laws. What's underlying to all of this is to make research output, not only data, but also manuscripts, fair. Where fair, you can use the word as it's commonly understood, like have fair access to knowledge as a global community, not only researchers, but humans in total, but also making the research as it's understood under fair research data, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And this is what also open access repositories increasingly provide for complying with the FAIR principles. And then at this point, it's probably also worth mentioning the difference between gratis and libre, where gratis means online access free of charge. This is basically commonly understood under OpenAccess, and libre is refers to the licensing of the work when it comes to copyright or more open licenses as compared to the copyright, which again should be a separate webinar or seminar of its kind. It's not as confusing and tricky as it might seem, but libre just means that the copyright is exchanged by a more open license like CC BY or author attribution, where anyone can use and reuse and build upon the knowledge shared through a manuscript. But for that, we need not the copyright, but other license types for author attribution. Okay, so now since recently in 2021, UNESCO, the department or the program for education, research, science and research organization under the United Nations, after lengthy consultations with stakeholders from around the world, amongst others also AfricaOSH participated, released the UNESCO recommendation on OpenScience, which you can find on the website, which is also on the slide. By the way, I wanted to share the slideshow with you. Okay, Kenya, I will send this to you. Could you just share it briefly in the chat? So you can also have access and comment on the slides where you want to have more information, and also for you to be able to access the URLs from the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for helping us. So UNESCO suggests that we want to make science more accessible, inclusive, and equitable for the benefit of all, in light of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which you can see here, and the belief of the UNESCO Open Science team, but also many researchers like myself and many others, and I'm sure the AfricaOSH community can also comply and agree, that each of the goals that are postulated in the SDGs can be achieved through open knowledge exchange amongst researchers from around the world. And this is basically what I personally call, but probably also others call, global research equity, with equitable access and opportunity to contribute and make use of information that's being accumulated. So what you find in the recommendations on open science by UNESCO is that underlying to any activities are values and principles, which are also commonly understood by the open science community, which has a track record of several decades, especially when it comes to open access, the open access movement. So we talk about transparency, scrutiny, ethical aspects, equity and fairness, collective benefit. So basically values that every human being and also every researcher and user of research output can easily comply with. The problem is that the moment we make or we apply restrictions to knowledge, the values become difficult to be kind of served in us and for collective benefit in general. The key pillars as defined by UNESCO, or as identified by UNESCO, and as standardized now in the scheme from various communities and open science activists and organizations from around the world, are categorized into the four categories, like open science infrastructure. This is where AfricArXiv would be found, because we provide and incentivize for the use of existing digital infrastructure for African research dissemination. And we are also in the process of establishing an African-owned digital infrastructure system. Then there's open scientific knowledge, access, and contribution. And we now today focus on scientific publications. for the most part. And then what's also interesting and highly important, not only but especially in the African context, is open dialogue with other knowledge systems. And here I'm really happy and grateful also for UNESCO, for the UNESCO Open Science team, that they acknowledge the importance of indigenous knowledge, which is held by indigenous peoples, and often, yeah, so again, this also deserves its own webinar, so maybe we can organize that for the future, and also other marginalized communities, and also marginalized scholars, like we now experience with the Ukraine. I'm personally also involved in supporting Ukrainian researchers who are basically in a different kind of lockdown situation, and eager to stay on track with some of their research trajectory as much as feasible under war circumstances. But we also often experience similar situations where it's difficult, for example, in Sudan, in the African continent, where sometimes there's restrictions to the internet, sometimes there's violence, which puts researchers into lockdown, so they cannot access their resources at the university anymore. And basically what we're trying to achieve is to develop workflows to keep some of these things still going and to keep up knowledge exchange irrespective, or to compensate also tricky situations like that. And also that deserves a separate discussion in depth, but this is one reasoning for understanding what marginalized scholars could be, or what situations scholars can sometimes find themselves in. And then there's open engagement of societal actors, which again is also nicely, like AfricaOSH members often work on the intersection to societal actors and with citizen science projects, and informing policymakers about research opportunities, finding integrative workflows to make use of scholarly knowledge for other societal stakeholders, like the agricultural sector or educative sector. So that's, of course, obviously also important to find ways, again, coming back to the SDGs, to, as soon as possible, through open access and open science practices, make the acquired knowledge from academia applicable to societal goals and milestones. So now, talking about preprints and preprint repositories, those have evolved to be an integral part of the open scholarly publishing workflow. It's not common practice yet for every researcher to consider sharing their preprint in a preprint repository, as they also submit the same manuscript to a journal. But it's very much an easy thing to do. And it's a matter of awareness raising that this opportunity is actually an opportunity you can do. And you save a lot of time, you can only benefit. And the restrictions or hesitations probably come from a compromised incentive system at your host university, which also slowly learns novel and alternative pathways for reputation building and career development. So what are preprints? We find several definitions. It's also not easy to coin to a very specific, well, actually it is. So basically a preprint is the scientific manuscript at the point of where the author deems it ready to be submitted to a journal. It's just a question of, like, preprints are debated about, do they count as much as a published journal article? And then the line of argumentation is always against, due to the lack of peer review, where in my understanding at this point, normally a manuscript has already undergone a certain amount of peer review. And if it's only internal, but often it's amongst the research group who's been working on the project, often it's made its rounds and the author sought feedback from colleagues in other disciplines. So there is already, so maybe there's just a need for a different check of validation, what degree of peer review has already been applied to the manuscript, and what quality of peer review was that. Because the level of quality of the peer reviews you receive through a journal manage peer review is also often questionable, for lack of better words. So basically, what you see now, like if you go to the preprint page on Wikipedia, you'll find this graphic where a preprint is the work in progress submitted version. And then so you would submit this to a journal and then wait for them to accept to then pass on to reviewers. And then the author accepted manuscript is also known as postprint. And then you have the published version of record. So the postprint is basically after peer review, can normally also be shared in green open access repositories. And then, but it's not yet copy edited and typesetted, which is would then be the published version. And which status of your manuscript you can share in an open access repository like AfricArXiv, you would have to verify with the journal you're submitting to. But the general guideline you see here, normally the version of record is to be approved by the journal, but often they have an open access policy that as long as you mention the journal where it's published, you can of course share it as well, but not every journal has an open access policy. But also, like in Africa, we have more and more universities embracing and establishing open access or open science policies at the institutions. So just to compare again, this is the traditional publishing workflow where a scientist writes a manuscript, submits it to a journal, the journal passes it on to the editor, or this then goes to an editor who passes the manuscript after first quality check on to peer reviewers. The first quality check is usually, does the article meet the scope of the journal and other quality checkpoints. And that's the most important one. And then they might send it out to reviewers. And then after the reviewers have given their reviews, and there's usually also a feedback loop with the authors, where you have to do more experiments or rewrite some of the sections of your paper before it finally gets accepted and published. The whole process, first of all, as we said before, might cost a lot of money, but also a lot of time goes down the drain, or not the drain, but goes by. So this process takes anything from usually 3 to 4 weeks, like a month, to it can also take several years. I'm not kidding. It's rare, but it happens. And it's also bad practice by the journal or lack of reviewers who are willing or can make time for reviews in a timely manner. But it's now becoming more common practice that the journal editors should give the authors a timeline when they can expect to have their articles processed and eventually published, or when they can expect feedback from the editors and the reviewers. So just make sure, as you select for a journal, make sure you have that information before you even consider to submitting to them. With preprint servers now, so you would submit the very same version of your article that you submit to a journal. You also submit to a preprint server, and thereby make it openly accessible on the internet. And you can share the link with your colleagues. You can share it on Twitter, and therefore allow funders, prospective employers for your career development, colleagues who you might not even know, who work on similar research topics, to share your findings early in the publishing process and still get published through a journal. So this is now basically becoming an established workflow. Some of you might already publish with bioRxiv or share your manuscripts on bioRxiv, which is also a preprint repository. And bioRxiv, for example, and this is what we're also establishing with AfricArXiv, has agreements with a list of publishers and journals that they have basically shortened and facilitated, publishing workflows with certain journals. So then you can just say, I would like my article be considered by this and that journal, and then bioRxiv will facilitate the submission process through their hosting. And then it reaches community with no delay, other than maybe a couple of days when the preprint service team manages to process. Yeah, this slide is from a publication I was also contributing to together with Paola Mazzuso, and she's a friend and colleague, data scientist, and she compiled this graph, which is why I attributed the slide to her. So there's many existing preprint repositories. Here you see Zenodo as one example, and you can see that Zenodo allows you to disseminate and share research output not only in the form of a research manuscript, but also images, data sets, software and code, presentations, slide decks, posters. So you can also have conference posters published and attributed to yourself. And all of that can then also feed into your ORCID ID. So you can build a list of accomplishments in your ORCID profile. And that's then the reference point to anyone who wants to see what you've accomplished as a researcher in your field. The whole idea with preprints goes back to 1991, where Paul Ginsberg from Cornell University, I think that's in Canada, established archive.org for the listed research disciplines, physics, math, computer science, etc. And since then, it's common practice for researchers in these disciplines to share preprints and then possibly consider also submitting to a journal, but much research output just remains shared as a preprint because, I mean, at the end of the day, that's all we need. It's already out there. We've paid our due diligence without spending a cent, basically. But of course, different disciplines have more incentives and other policies in place where for your career and reputation building, you have to publish in a peer-reviewed journal with a certain impact factor, which is its own story and also again deserves a separate webinar. It's highly disputed. So the transition towards preprint sharing only might provide difficult, and it doesn't have to be. So you can also do both. So yeah, so again, there's a high variety of repositories and also the repository systems. I see here, for example, Arabic Science Archive, AgriCarXiv for agricultural research. I think they've also changed the name recently. SOC Archive for social sciences, bioRxiv, medRxiv, which had a peak season or continues to have a peak season thanks to the pandemic, or not thanks to or due to the pandemic, where a lot of medical research and COVID-related research is being shared through the recently, before the pandemic hit, established medRxiv preprint repository. AcceptBio is an organization, I also had a slide before, they're focusing on bioscience and OpenAccess and preprint sharing, but they basically have an overview of the existing preprint repositories across all disciplines, and you can find that also on the website to get an idea of how many preprint repositories exist, and most are discipline specific, and some like AfricArXiv and InArchive for Indonesia are regional country specific. What you should consider when you choose a preprint repository is that, first of all, obviously it's open access, and that you get a DOI with the submission of your article to the repository, and also an open license as in CC BY. I realized that we have, well, I think I underestimated the time I would use to for the information I wanted to share with you. So I'm kind of I'll probably skip a few slides to allow for Q&A. But I want to highlight also, other than manuscript sharing, and most preprint repositories focus on manuscripts and research articles, but there is also a global registry of research data repositories. And this will, you will see, will also be interesting, especially in an African context, where data sharing is, I mean, anywhere data sharing is unfortunately not common practice, or researchers have unlearned to make their research data fair and open, or as open as feasible. But here you see that this registry lists basically the research data repositories that exist across the world. In green are existing countries, or countries that have existing repositories. You see that many African countries are still blue, so you don't have standardized data repositories in these countries just yet, or they have not been added to this registry. So both can be true. And now, if, for example, in the registry we search for Africa, not limiting ourselves to African researchers, but any repositories that has Africa in its name, or has an Africa as a tag or as a keyword in its description, then you'll find 42 archives, some of which will be in the continent, like the UNISA Institutional Repository, and others are outside Africa, but probably hosting research data about any African topic. So this might also be an interesting source, and the color codes here, or the icons on the side to your left indicate, like, if you see the OpenAccess sign, then you see, okay, this repository is actually accessible, and you get other information on how you may gain access if they're not open access, or other standards that apply. So now I would like to just briefly mention a tool that you can find on my website at access2perspectives.org. Is a publication strategy and OpenScience. Basically, where, again, like if you think back to the introduction, where if you ask why do we want to share the results of our research, so this is basically like, what's the purpose of our research in the first place? And now that we've collected results, what do we want to achieve with sharing what we found? And then you can answer this question as a team, for example, with, we want to establish priority on our findings, we want to communicate with societal stakeholders, or we want to reach the largest possible audience for what we found. And then this is actually a living document. You can access it through the link. You will get to the blog post where we highlight this. And then you get suggestions in the other sections, the what, when, how, and where get highlighted. And then you can basically also manually select others, and therefore inform yourself as a team, how can we achieve the dissemination in the most strategic and most open possible way, in compliance with the open science principles. So this is probably worthwhile for you to explore further, and you're most welcome to also contact me for any further information on this. Now, the journal selection is also a highly debated process, and many researchers just follow the footsteps of their colleagues, as in, where do we in our discipline tend to publish? But you can go beyond that, and there are several databases and registries, for example, George, the Directory of Open Access Journals, where you get only open access journals that are either at least hybrid, but usually full open access, and you have both diamond, gold, and green, or diamond and gold open access and hybrid, so that you can be sure, if you consider these journals for publishing in them, you have the opportunity of making your research output accessible. And then there is tools that you can also use, and if you already have a write-up or an abstract or a summary of your research, that you want to publish, you can go to either the Open Journal Matcher or the add-ons journal selector, and then of course the Think, Check, Submit to journals checklist that's provided by the organization Think, Check, Submit, and you also find that in a various African language explanation. So this is what the Open Journal Matcher looks. You enter your abstract on the left, and then after a few seconds get the results of which journals match the keywords that you used in your abstract. And here is the journal selector tool, which is also free for you to access and to use, which has, unfortunately, in my view, also a decision maker for the impact factor, which, again, let's have a separate discussion on that, but the impact factor should not be a selection criteria of where to publish in. There are no good journals or bad journals, they're just bad or good articles, and it matters that you publish, not so much where you publish. But then, of course, there's predatory journals, which are also highly debated, but what defines a predatory journal is a discussion on its own. And let's just, for the sake of time, skip that for now, but it's still an important discussion to have. And now peer review, because that's the most common critical point for against preprint dissemination. I want to assure you that we also as AfricArXiv have several collaborators, and our closest collaborator is currently PeerReview, which provide for peer review opportunities on the preprint level. So on the preprint that is publicly available, you can then share the link with a group of researchers who come together and comment and review the quality or give their feedback on the presented results. There's not only PeerReview, there's many other organizations and tools and services that focus on preprints and peer review and quality assurance. And yeah, also again, as a bio provides an overview, and you can familiarize yourself with any of these. And now, this has not been common practice in the past several decades, but it's becoming more and more incentivized to also publish your review report. And organizations like PeerReview have that as a common practice, and because it informs the research further with the expertise that the reviewers bring in on commenting on a manuscript draft. Okay, so here's just again a summary of what encompasses OpenScience. We talked about open peer review. There's also open research data, open educational resources, software and code, and hardware. And hardware is obviously for AfricaOSH, the key component. In Africa, we have various infrastructure providers, which you see on this slide with LibSense, or organizations who facilitate communication and debate about how to establish digital infrastructure for scholarly purposes across the continent. Here, coming back to open peer review, this is a project currently underway between the four organizations, PeerReview, TCC Africa, Beta Africa, and AfricArXiv, and coordinated and facilitated by eLife, the publisher, and funded by Wellcome Trust, where we establish best practices in an African context for open peer review. And this also had a huge component on decolonizing academia for Africa. And we will soon release the results and the materials, so watch this space. Here's just an overview, or here's an overview, not just, but very much so, on other organizations and capacity building institutions, and for open source, open code, open data. Open hardware, obviously, AfricaOSH, and the upcoming summit. Landon might probably also announce that. I think applications have just closed, I'm pretty sure of that. But from that summit happening soon in Cameroon, you will also receive output and learnings, and you can for sure also follow some of the sessions online, because it's planned to, like, the most recent information I have is planned as a hybrid event, so there are probably also opportunity to join on short notice through webinar style. Yeah, this we covered. Knowledge sharing with indigenous knowledge holders, OpenScience and societal actors, OpenScience infrastructure. And I just want to end on highlighting the work we do with AfricArXiv and providing reciprocal discoverability of African research content. So we established AfricArXiv for that purpose, to overcome challenges such as language barriers, English, French, Arabic, Lusophone, Portuguese basically, but also, of course, we are fostering the use of traditional African languages for scholarly purposes, and are currently also working on a project called Decolonized Science, where we translate 100 research articles into lay summaries in English and then translate these into 6 traditional African languages. Yeah, I'm just quickly skipping through some of our key activities. Here are the 4 key projects we're currently running. Open peer reviews in Africa is the slide that you just saw before, decolonizing scientific writing for Africa. I'll quickly show you an overview, which you can also access through our website, on digital research repositories in Africa. And then we have, of course, also a COVID-19 knowledge hub, which you can source from. And multilingualism is key because African languages need and deserve more prominence in academia, especially in the African continent, but also to enable communication to societal actors, indigenous peoples, the public in the various countries and regions. And this is basically an overview of the map I was mentioning. So each dot refers either to an institution or repository, some of which are also AfricArXiv and repositories that you find in other places. And here is an example for Nigeria, where you see the red dots are institutional repositories, and you have the institutions which host some of these. Oops. So basically, and then each node has meta information, so you can also go through the node to the website of the repository and then access the scholarly works that are hosted there. So this is basically our effort, despite hosting preprint manuscripts and data through our partners. We also do stock taking of the existing knowledge hubs and repositories that exist on the continent to improve from there the discoverability of the same. Here is an overview of the countries we have received submissions from. And yeah, and then to stay in touch with AfricArXiv and to join our community, or to learn more in a meeting, you can just book a call with us through calendly.com/AfricArXiv and then get on a call and we explain further. Or you can, of course, reach us through our email and social media channels. Thank you. I think we just out of time. But can we maybe opportunity to stay on? I will be available for however long it takes. Thank you for your patience.
All right, thank you, Joe. That was quite insightful. If anyone has any questions for Joe, I'm sure she will be open to answering them. Please raise your hand, or you could type it in the chat box.
Yeah, please don't be shy to answer anything. Oh yeah, Kali.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Even like,
thank you so much for an insightful presentation. Can you hear me?
You're most welcome.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thanks for the insightful presentation. Uh, um, I, I I think I listened once to your webinar about trying to self-archive your materials for discovery and visibility. So I went to the website and also tried to register first, then tried to upload the manuscript, but unfortunately I couldn't get it through. So that's why I'm asking that maybe by the end of this presentation, if we can get your slide, then go back again and revisit the process. Is it possible to get the slide after the presentation?
Yes, of course. You should already have the slides, or can maybe share it again if there were connectivity issues. Let me just share in the chat. And you're most welcome to what am I saying? Most welcome to email us or to get on a call through Calendly, so we can help you through. We can guide you through the submission process. And I'm sorry that the submission didn't go through. I don't know. Sometimes maybe there was a connectivity issue, so it was not saved on our end, or there was some other hitch or glitch. Not even sure, I'm not a native English speaker, but we can certainly sort it. And the easiest way is to use our Google form, where you can upload your manuscript into a Google form and then add all the additional information, like your author details, ORCID IDs, your contact details automatically selected with your email. And that should then be going through. And then we will submit on your behalf unless we have any other questions to clarify with you. Does that help? Other questions?
Thank you for responding to that, Joe. Any more questions, please?
Thanks, Camille. Yeah, don't be shy to ask any question. There's a lot that I touched upon and couldn't go into detail. There's a lot we can talk about. It's really exciting times where many stakeholders are coming together to increase and build upon the existing infrastructures. We're not building anything from scratch. A lot of work has already happened in the past decades. And now in the digital area with digital tools and digital infrastructure, we can leapfrog like massively and make use of existing tools and building tools for a specific purpose in the African research context and ecosystem. Kali again, are you still raising your hand, or do you have another question? Also,
yes.
I shared in the chat, I shared the link to our submission portal, which you should hopefully can access there.
Okay. During the presentation, you made mention that when you submit your manuscript, there's a way you can share it with other peer reviewers. How do you go about doing that? Can you briefly explain again?
Yeah, I didn't go into details, so I'm very happy to explain. So, for example, we're setting up, there's many organizations who provide preprint-based peer review, and to be honest, this is still confusing for people like me, even though I consider myself an expert for digital tools and scholarship. But PeerReview as an organization, has different communities you can join, and there have a group that comes together, or like an individual. You don't have to find out friend colleagues to comment. Oh, sorry, that link is not working. Why? Let me just find the right URL for you. But basically what you do is you would use your ORCID ID to register on, in this then, the PeerReview platform. and then you can comment, or you can have an explicit or short commentary only to a research paper. On the platform, you can also search through already existing reviews. PeerReview also gives guidelines in what is a good review, what you should consider as a reviewer, and how explicit and concise it should be. So basically, you can also ask questions to the authors. Some portals have either you can also use it as a commenting system or asking questions to the authors. And then this will also help the authors to improve the manuscript, even if you just ask 1 or 2 questions to the article where you want to learn more, or you decide to submit a full review report like you would if you would be a reviewer for a journal. And there's a guideline that organizations like PeerReview also put together in their resources center. I'm also sharing the link to that, and what a formal peer review should entail. And basically, maybe to answer your question, I think that maybe this is more helpful as an answer. A preprint gets a DOI assigned to it. So it will then be identified and forever published on the internet, and identifiable through an identification number. And this can then be used to, in a reviewer platform, or in Publons. Publons has been around for I think about a decade now. So basically, you can write your own review in Word or in any writing software package. Sorry for lack of better words, in any system, and read the article online or print it out, and then write a review report following guiding questions like how well as the methodology described, and so on and so forth. Does the expectation that the reader gets from reading the abstract and the title, is this being answered in the document or in the results section and conclusions? So this basically to assess the thoroughness of the research article. You can write your own report and then use PeerReview and Publons or put your review report on Zenodo, or like also AfricArXiv, where you can also host review reports. But then you need to make sure that the DOI of the published article your review is mentioned. So to establish a connection between your report and which article it's being reviewing. Does that answer your question? So it sounds like it's very technical. In some cases it can be, but the platforms and organizations try to make that easy for you. If you decide for one or the other service, it's pretty straightforward. But different organizations have established different workflows. But you can also have your own workflow and publish your review report as you would any research article. But just make sure that you mention the title and the DOI and some other metadata of the article that you're reviewing in the metadata.
Yes, it does, ma'am. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anyone have any more questions for Joe, please?
You can also reach me by email or ask the team at info@africarchive.org. And of course, also through my website, where we share other more general information about scientific writing and publishing and community building and research ethics and such things on access2perspective.org. And the website again for AfricArXiv to submit your work, and also join our community there under contact. You can find how to join our Slack channel. We have a WhatsApp group, Telegram group, once the WhatsApp group is full. So you can reach out anytime through us, and I'm sure Landon and his team at AfricaOSH will also forward your questions through AfricaOSH to us.
Yes, we would. Yes, we would.
Thank you. Sorry for throwing that board. Okay.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. I think
Maybe
everyone is.
we could possibly stop the recording, and then people would be less shy to ask anything in public.
Okay.
And maybe
Okay.
we can also keep the last question for those. I don't know. Like, it's just that some people tend to be shy on records, but when the recording is off, they are happy to unmute.
Okay. So we'll stop recording now.